I told you in my first video that I think something is happening in the UK, and I think it's by design, only that I don't know exactly what it is and I don't know exactly what the design was, but I can tell you what I think is happening and that I think there is some design behind it. And that is even more emboldened now with the leaked news as of yesterday evening, following on from Keir Starmer and his shock U-turn with the grooming gang inquiry, saying that now it's no longer a far-right bandwagon, rather something that actually is a good idea and that they should be doing that. Because the details leaked suggest that there is a design behind sort of covering this information up, or as to why they were not pressing forward with this inquiry beforehand, because perhaps for fear of what it might reveal. And all of this is speculation, you understand, not just by me, but by many people. And the information leaked is quite staggering. I will credit GB News for that source of information. And many people, well, I say many, some people might say, oh, you're getting your information from GB News? Well, you know, let's wait and see, shall we? Let's wait and see what comes out in this Casey report, which is likely to be released on Monday, and whether or not it backs up the leaked information that is being put out by GB News. I do believe that this is quite likely to be true. Now, I'll come to that in just a moment, but beforehand, let's just touch again on what I think as being dishonest statements, on the face of it, dishonest statements, and demonstrably so, because you'll recall that I talked about Darren Jones' comments on migrants coming across the channel. He said the vast majority were women, children, and babies. Let me play that clip for you just one moment. If I share my screen here and flip this across to the side. That wasn't very well prepared, but I'll mute myself and you can listen to this. Let's just remind ourselves of this for a moment.
I was telling when you see that the majority of the people in these boats are children, babies and women who have been...
No, they're not.
No, you have got to take... No, look, I get this is...
North of 90% of them are adult men.
I wasn't referring...
Now, obviously, he's... I won't say he's corrected the position. He's said something on it. And I've got this one open here because Piers Morgan had comments on here. Now, whether you love or hate Piers Morgan, just like I mentioned Ben Shapiro in a previous video, and someone's like, oh, you're quoting Ben Shapiro. It's like, look, I can quote somebody and doesn't necessarily I agree with everything they say, you understand? So let's be a bit adult about that. But that's aimed at very, very few people, you understand. But Piers Morgan says here, if there's one thing worse than telling such a brazen, absurd, instantly refutable whopper on Question Time, then it's digging yourself into an even deeper trench with your clarifications ever since. Stop, he says. And he's talking, of course, to Darren Jones, making this comment here where Darren Jones tries to sort of backpedal quicker than going the wrong way down a one-way street, and says, of course, the overall majority of people arriving illegally on small boats are men, but not north of 90% as Reform claimed. So a backtrack of sorts, and utterly ridiculous. Let's be honest, Darren, there's an utterly ridiculous backtrack and clarification here. And then he says, on BBC Question Time, I shared a story from my visit from Border Security about a dinghy that arrived mostly carrying women, children and babies who had suffered horrific burns. Now, that's obviously awful. Assuming that it's true, of course, I've no reason to refute it, but assuming that it's true, that is obviously awful. And those kind of things are awful. That is why I always put some sort of caveat whenever I speak of this in these videos, because there are real situations like that are really awful, that we should be taking seriously, that absolutely some people deserve our assistance. But then he says here, I'm happy to clarify this, given that it's now being misrepresented. But it wasn't misrepresented, because that's not what he said. That's utterly ridiculous. To suggest that that story is being misrepresented when he said what I've just played to you is just absurd. And he was called out on that as well. And yes, it's an Americanism, I know that. I adopt phrases however I please. But let's take a listen to this. He's been called out on this because it's utterly absurd. Listen to this.
Accept that you now did mislead the Question Time audience last week when you suggested that the majority of people crossing the channel illegally were women, children and babies, when in fact they're adult males?
Well, look, I think it's been clipped by, I think, Reform in a particular way. If you look at the whole conversation, I wasn't referring to the total number of people being a majority of women, children and babies. I was telling... When you see that the majority of the people in these boats are children, babies and women who have been...
No, they're not.
No, they're not. No, you have...
And now you can't possibly take that seriously, can you? Because it was so patently untrue and so obviously a backtrack trying to undo the mess that it made. He would hypothetically have been better to have said, okay, I lied. I just wanted people to believe a thing when it was not true. Or alternatively, okay, I misunderstood. I really did think that it was women and children and babies. I've been misled. I misunderstood or whatever. It'd have been better to have said that than try to instead say, actually, no, it was just a story that I was telling you. It's been misrepresented somehow. And that's why people misunderstand. Not that I got it wrong or that I lied or whatever. Hypothetically, you understand, because people were just not buying that. And that's what makes this so patently absurd. But also, speaking of equally patently absurd, and by the way, this is why we're on my Off the Record channel. If you're on this video wondering, why is he speaking like this? This is a little bit more candid than is used to speaking. Well, this is my Off the Record channel. So again, please do subscribe here. But speaking of patently absurd and misleading statements, there are loads of these. I was debating which to show you first, the video or the statement that came later that is contradictory. I'll show you the video first because there are loads of these. This is one such video where previously they were selling you, in my view, they were selling you a lie. They were selling you the idea that the VAT on school fees was going to fund teachers and state schools and everything else. And they repeatedly said as much. So there was no reason for you to believe otherwise because they've repeatedly told you, unless, of course, you were convinced at the outset that all of this was nonsense and therefore, no one would have voted them in the first place. But there we go. Just have a listen to this and I'll show you the quote. Again, I've done this before, but again, just to make it absolutely clear, listen to this.
By getting rid of the tax exemptions that exist before for private schools, we're able to invest £1.7 billion of money into our state schools so that they can recruit and retain the very best teachers so that all children can get a great start in life.
Now, aside from the contradiction that she says all children, now about 7% of children, that's a lot of children. If I were to say to you, 7% of everything you own, you probably suddenly think that that's quite a lot. 7% of everything, that'd be quite a lot. So 7% of children thereabouts go to independent schools. And she so gleefully told you that she's taking money off those children, but putting it into state schools, aside from the big smile on her face whilst taking money essentially off children. Okay, it's from their parents, but taking money off children. This has got to be the most sickening policy I've ever seen any government in my lifetime, and probably my father's lifetime as well, but my late father. But have a listen to this just once more.
£1.7 billion of money into our state schools so that they can recruit and retain the very best teachers so that all children can get a great start in life.
And if that wasn't clear enough, there is yet another example here, just to make it even clearer that the plan that you were being sold was to put this money into state schools. Listen to this one.
1.7 billion made from this tax increase for the state. Will all that money be ring-fenced for state schools?
Yes, every single penny of that money will go into our state schools to ensure that every child gets the best start in life. And
every single penny, she said. Well, that is obviously not entirely true because, well, maybe it is and Keir Starmer's lying, or maybe Keir Starmer's telling the truth and she was lying all along. Who knows? Because they can't both be true. Because if every single penny was going into state schools and that was true, then Keir Starmer's lying. Or if Keir Starmer's telling the truth, then that was a lie. They can't both be true because Keir Starmer, as I said in my previous video, said here, in the budget last year, my government made the tough but fair decision to apply VAT to private schools. The Tories opposed it, Reform opposed it. Today, because of that choice, we've announced the largest investment in affordable housing in a generation. So even if 1 penny of it actually goes to housing, then she was lying. Or if she's telling the truth and every single penny is going to state schools, then he's lying. And that is my opinion based on these facts, because that's just what they've said. I'm not making it up. They can't both be true. And so that leads me then to wonder, what really are they worried about in all of these things? And it's not just that, obviously. We come back now full circle to Keir Starmer announcing that he's doing this inquiry. After all, after many months of saying that anybody calling for this inquiry are jumping on a so-called bandwagon, we get these leaks through GB News. And as I say, you know, this is not me making a statement of fact that these are all true. These are me reporting on the leaks reported by GB News, which, love them or hate them, this is what's being reported. So let's take a look at what this says here. And just for the credit, by the way, I understand this is the courteous thing to do. I think it was The Sun that had the source familiar with the report by the author Baroness Louise Casey. So I'll link both The Sun and GB News and any others I find below, just for credit there. But these screenshots are taken from GB News video. I'll link that below as well. But the leaks ahead of this report being published are said to have been what's pushed Keir Starmer to direct this inquiry. Because if it's even close to as damning as it sounds like it's going to be, Keir Starmer's going to look pretty bad come Monday if the report's released Monday. But here's a few things that these leaks say this report is said to reveal. First of all, apparently these grooming gangs are going to be explicitly linked with men of Pakistani origin. Now, this is obviously what's been discussed for many, many months now. And if this is what the report says, and there is an explicit link here, and that is what's been said all along, and some people have ignored that all along and said that other people are far right for saying that all along, then obviously that's going to look pretty damning on anyone who's criticised talking about those links. Secondly, additionally, illegal migration, including those coming on small boats across the channel, is also said to be, within this report, directly linked to the exploitation and violence of British girls, which is obviously going to be, again, ramping up the ante here, because obviously this is a very prevalent issue. There are thousands upon thousands of migrants coming across the channel, virtually daily in some instances. And if this report links all of this exploitation and violence directly to those crossings, then we have a serious problem. Thirdly, the leaks suggest that the report will say that despite Keir Starmer's resistance to launching an inquiry, he will be told to launch an inquiry into the scandal, and that is understood to be why he launched it yesterday. So this, again, quite damning for a report to say, you absolutely should do this, when not all that long ago he was calling this a far-right bandwagon. And that, I think, for him was really the start of the downturn, when he was calling lots of people far right, because a lot of people don't consider themselves far right or right at all. They just have their views and then they're labelled up as far right. And I think that's just lazy, quite frankly, because I consider some of my views you might think are left-wing views. Some of my views, some people might think are right-wing views. And so it doesn't really matter what I as an individual think. It matters really what collectively we think. And I don't think that's represented properly in Parliament. That's just my view. But finally, and possibly the most devastating leak of all, if this report really does say this when it comes out, is that the Prime Minister will be warned that white British girls who were targeted were institutionally ignored for fear of racism. And that is a serious problem, because having been accused of being part of some kind of harassment just recently, which they say resulted in racial abuse and so on, I find that the most insulting thing personally. And so for people, I think, to be fearful of being accused of racism, to institutionally ignore this kind of thing, it's going to be the most devastating scandal we have probably ever seen in this country. And so this report, I think, is going to be absolutely damning. And just to quote The Sun here, they say the Home Office refused to deny the involvement of illegal migration in the Casey report. Government spokesperson said, nothing is more important than protecting vulnerable children. We are determined to crack down on the vile grooming gangs once and for all. That's why we've ordered a rapid national audit to uncover the true scale of the horrific abuse, etc. So we'll have to see what this Casey report says. And I suspect there's going to be a lot more in it than just these leaks. But stay tuned for it. I'll be here for it. I'll tell you what I think about it. Please do subscribe to this channel. Off the record, you will get exactly what I think. And I do think it was the right choice. A few of you did recommend that. And I do hear you. You know, I heard a lot of people in the comments on Black Belt Barrister saying, please take the politics off, move them elsewhere. I do hear you. I think that's a good idea. I think it was the right choice. Consider yourself heard. If you do feel that way, please do subscribe here. That's all that I ask of you. Please do also give a like to the video. That helps YouTube to promote the video and so on. Share it with somebody, perhaps. And as always, thank you so much for watching.